It was one of those summer afternoons when the air feels heavy and everything seems to move a little slower. The sun hung above the small Florida town like a bright spotlight, making the streets shimmer with heat. Kids played basketball on cracked courts, music floated from passing cars, and people were just going about their usual day, unaware that something unforgettable was about to happen. Dion was 17, tall and full of energy. He wasn't perfect, but he was the kind of kid people liked having around. He had this calm way of speaking, always polite, always smiling. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him for helping out his neighbors, carrying groceries for the elderly lady down the street, or giving little kids pointers on how to shoot better on the basketball court. He dreamed of becoming a coach one day, maybe even opening his own community sports center. That day, he had just finished basketball practice at the school gym. His shirt clung to him with sweat, and his shoes were dusty from hours of play. He decided to stop by the corner store on his way home to grab a cold drink and a snack. The little store sat across from an old gym where something big was happening. The Rock and John Cena were filming a short video for a charity program that helped local kids stay active. The whole neighborhood had gathered around, excited to see two of the biggest stars in person. Dion didn't pay much attention to the crowd. He wasn't the type to chase celebrities or take selfies. He just wanted something cold to drink and maybe a moment of air conditioning before heading home. As he walked into the store, the doorbell chimed. He nodded to the store owner, who smiled and greeted him like always. Dion picked a bottle of orange soda from the fridge, grabbed a bag of chips, and placed a few crumpled bills on the counter. Outside, a police cruiser rolled down the street. Inside sat Officer Rickson, a man who had been on the force for years but carried a chip on his shoulder. Some said he was strict, others said he was unfair, especially when it came to certain people in town. He had faced complaints before but always managed to keep his badge. That afternoon he was on edge. Dispatch had just reported a possible shoplifting incident at a different store nearby. The suspect's description was vague: young male, dark clothing, athletic build. That was all he needed to let his assumptions take over. As Dion stepped out of the store, twisting the cap off his soda, the police car slowed to a stop. The sound of tires crunching against gravel caught his attention. He turned slightly and saw the officer staring at him through the windshield. The moment their eyes met, Dion felt uneasy, though he hadn't done anything wrong. Rickson got out of the car, hand resting near his belt. "Hey, you there," he called out sharply. "Stop right there." Dion froze, soda still in his hand. "Me?" he asked, confused. "Yeah, you. Come here for a second." The tone was harsh, commanding. Not a request, but an order. People nearby noticed. Some started whispering. Some pulled out their phones. Across the street, The Rock and John Cena, who had been taking a short break from filming, turned their heads toward the commotion. Dion walked forward slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. "What's going on, officer?" he asked politely. "Where are you coming from?" Rickson demanded. "Basketball practice. I just came to get a drink." He lifted his bag, little, trying to show he had nothing but a towel and a pair of sneakers inside. Rickson's expression didn't soften. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," he said, circling him slightly, eyes scanning him from head to toe. "I didn't do anything," Dion said calmly. "You can check my bag if you want." The officer didn't respond right away. The crowd started to grow. A few people shouted for him to leave the kid alone. The Rock and Cena watched closely. Cena whispered to The Rock, "Something's off about this." The Rock nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the scene. Dion stood still, trying not to make the situation worse. He could feel his heart beating faster. All he wanted was to get home. "Officer, please," he said softly. "I didn't steal anything. I was just—" "Keep your hands where I can see them," Rickson interrupted sharply. Dion lifted his hands halfway, holding the soda in one, bag in the other. The soda slipped slightly and the bottle cap fell to the ground with a tiny metallic clink. The sound made Rickson flinch. "Drop what's in your hand," the officer barked. Dion hesitated, then placed the soda on the ground gently. "See? I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, voice trembling but respectful. Phones were recording now from every angle. People were murmuring, some angry, some scared. The Rock took a few steps forward, telling his assistant quietly to keep filming everything. Cena stood beside him, tense, ready to step in if things went bad. Dion looked directly at the officer. "You don't have to be scared of me," he said. "I just want to go home." But fear wasn't the problem. Pride was. Rickson's jaw tightened. The more people watched, the more defensive he became. He didn't want to look weak in front of a crowd. The Rock sensed it. He whispered, "He's losing control." One of the bystanders called out, "He didn't do anything. You're scaring him." But the officer ignored them. His hand hovered too close to his weapon. Dion slowly lowered his arms, trying to pick up the soda he had placed down. He wanted to calm things, show he wasn't a threat. But the officer misread the movement. He stepped closer, shouting, "Don't move!" Dion froze again. "Okay," he said softly. "I'm not moving." His voice cracked a little, filled with fear and confusion. The Rock finally stepped forward a few more feet, calling out, "Officer, it's okay, he's just a kid." Rickson turned his head for a brief second, surprised to hear the deep, familiar voice. The crowd gasped. "That's The Rock," someone whispered, "and John Cena's with him." The tension hung thick in the air. The scene looked like it was about to spiral out of control. The Rock kept his voice calm, firm. "You don't have to make this worse," he said. "Everyone's watching. Just listen to him." Rickson's breathing grew heavier. He glanced around, realizing dozens of phones were pointed at him. For a moment it seemed like he might back off, but the weight of his own anger, his fear of losing authority, pushed him the other way. Dion, trying to steady his nerves, said again, "Please, I just want to go home." His words came out almost as a whisper. John Cena moved closer now, standing beside the Rock. "He's unarmed," Cena said loudly. "You can see that." The officer didn't respond. The sound of the crowd faded into a strange silence, like everyone was holding their breath. Dion took a tiny step back, not to run, just instinctively reacting to the officer's intensity. That was enough to make Rickson yell again. "Stay still!" People flinched. Someone screamed. The Rock raised his hand slightly as if trying to calm both sides. "Easy, man," he said. "He's just scared. Everyone's scared right now." The store owner stepped out, yelling, "He didn't steal nothing. That boy's been coming here for years." But Rickson's face showed no change. His mind was locked. The air was so still that even the sound of traffic from the next street over felt distant. Dion's eyes darted toward the crowd. He saw faces, neighbors, classmates, strangers, all watching him. He looked back at the officer and said quietly, "I didn't do anything wrong." And then, before anyone could blink, a loud sound cracked through the air. Screams filled the street. Phones shook as people ran for cover. The Rock and Cena sprinted toward Dion, who was lying on the ground, eyes wide open in shock. The soda bottle rolled away, fizzing as orange liquid spilled across the hot pavement. "Call an ambulance," Cena shouted, kneeling beside him. The Rock pressed his hand gently near Dion's shoulder, speaking in a calm, firm voice. "Stay with us, kid. You're gonna be fine. Stay with me." The crowd erupted in chaos, some crying, others yelling for justice. The officer stood frozen, realizing what he'd done. Cameras captured everything. The panic, the disbelief, the stars helping a bleeding teenager on a Florida street. The Rock looked up at the officer with disbelief. "Why would you do that?" he said, his voice low and full of pain. Rickson's hands shook as he reached for his radio, but the words wouldn't come out. Around them, sirens wailed in the distance. People kept recording, knowing that what they'd just seen wasn't something the world could ignore. The Rock leaned closer to Dion. "You hang on, all right? Help's coming. Don't give up." Dion blinked slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to go home." Cena's jaw clenched, eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. "You will, buddy," he said. "You will." The sound of sirens grew louder. The scene felt unreal, almost frozen in time. Two of the world's biggest stars kneeling on a sun-baked street, holding on to hope for a kid who'd done nothing wrong. And as the ambulance pulled up, the whole town, maybe the whole world, was about to see what really happened that afternoon when a moment of fear changed everything. The sound of sirens grew louder, echoing through the streets as people stepped back, leaving space for the ambulance to pull up. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the nearby store windows and onto the shocked faces of the crowd. No one could believe what had just happened. The air was heavy, thick with disbelief and anger. The Rock stayed beside Dion, holding a towel over his shoulder while the paramedics rushed to help. John Cena spoke quickly to one of the officers, who had just arrived, explaining what he and everyone else saw. The crowd shouted for justice, but The Rock raised a hand asking them to stay calm so the medics could work. Dion's breathing was slow, but he was still conscious. His eyes darted around in confusion. He whispered something, but his voice was too faint. The Rock leaned closer. "Don't try to talk," he said gently. "You're safe now. You're going to the hospital. We're right here." Rickson stood several feet away, pale and silent. His hands trembled slightly as another officer guided him toward the car. People shouted at him, but he didn't respond. He looked lost, as if he couldn't quite process what he had done. The paramedics lifted Dion onto a stretcher and carefully slid him into the back of the ambulance. The Rock climbed in with them, refusing to leave the boy alone. Cena followed in another vehicle, determined to be there when they reached the hospital. The drive was tense. The Rock sat near Dion, watching the paramedics check his pulse and blood pressure. The rhythmic sound of the siren filled the air, mixed with short bursts of radio chatter. Every few seconds, The Rock would say softly, "You're strong, kid. You're gonna make it. Just hold on." At the hospital, doctors and nurses rushed him into the emergency room. The Rock stayed behind the glass wall, watching helplessly as they worked on him. Cena joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a while. Outside, the news had already spread. Dozens of reporters were arriving at the scene where everything happened. Videos recorded by the crowd were already online. Within minutes, the footage began to circulate across social media platforms. Millions of people were seeing the moment: the officer, the shot, and the two wrestlers running to help the teenager. Back at the hospital, Dion's mother arrived in tears, rushing through the hallway with her hands shaking. The Rock stepped forward immediately. "He's alive," he told her softly. "They're taking care of him. He's strong." She nodded, unable to speak, and sank into a chair, clutching her phone tightly. Cena got her a bottle of water, trying to comfort her the best he could. Hours passed before a doctor came out. "He's stable for now," the doctor said. "It's serious, but he's strong. He's lucky people got to him so quickly." The Rock let out a breath of relief, but he didn't smile. The whole situation weighed heavily on him. "Can she see him?" he asked. The doctor nodded. Dion's mother stood up slowly and followed the nurse inside. Cena looked over at The Rock. "We can't just walk away from this," he said quietly. The Rock nodded. "We won't." That night, both of them stayed at the hospital. Reporters camped outside, trying to get interviews. The hospital staff did their best to keep them away. Inside, Dion's mother sat beside her son's bed, whispering prayers while machines beeped softly in the background. When Dion finally opened his eyes again, it was early morning. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin lines across the white walls. He looked tired but calm. His mother held his hand tightly, crying tears of relief. The Rock stood in the doorway with a small smile. "Hey, champ," The Rock said softly. "You gave us a scare." Dion tried to speak, but his voice was weak. "Did I do something wrong?" The Rock shook his head. "No, kid. You did nothing wrong. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Dion blinked slowly, processing it all. "Everyone was shouting," he whispered. "I didn't understand what was happening." "I know," The Rock said. "But you stayed calm. That took a lot of courage." Over the next few hours, the hospital filled with supporters, reporters, and even local leaders who wanted to check on Dion. But The Rock and Cena made sure he got peace. They stayed mostly in the background, giving the family privacy while quietly speaking to the press about what they saw. On television, news anchors discussed the incident from every angle. The video was replayed again and again, sparking debate and outrage. Hashtags started trending. People from all over the country were demanding answers. Some praised The Rock and Cena for stepping in, calling them heroes. Others focused on Dion, A good kid who didn't deserve what happened. At the police station, Rickson was placed on administrative leave while the investigation began. Officers who had worked with him for years couldn't believe what they saw on the video. His chief gave a short statement to the media, saying the department would cooperate fully and that justice would be served fairly. But for Dion's family, none of that mattered right now. All they wanted was for him to recover. The Rock and Cena visited again that evening. They brought him a basketball signed by both of them. Dion smiled faintly when he saw it. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said. "Of course we are," Cena said with a grin. "We don't just show up for the cameras." The Rock nodded. "We're here for you, not for the headlines." They talked for a while, about basketball, about Dion's dream to coach, and about how unfair the world could be sometimes. The Rock listened more than he spoke, letting Dion share how he felt. There was something powerful about hearing the boy's thoughts. Simple, honest, and full of hope despite everything. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, a crowd had started to gather. People held signs calling for justice. News vans lined the street. Reporters tried to get quotes from anyone leaving the building. Some of them even spotted The Rock and Cena, asking questions as they walked out. The Rock stopped for a moment and looked directly into the cameras. "We were there," he said calmly. "We saw what happened. That young man did nothing wrong. All he did was exist. And that should never be a reason to get hurt. This isn't about politics. It's about humanity. It's about doing what's right," Cena added. "We can't undo what happened, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again. People need to care, not just when the cameras are rolling, but every day." Their words spread fast. People shared the clip online, praising them for speaking out. For many, it wasn't just about two celebrities. It was about two men using their voices when it truly mattered. Back in his hospital room, Dion watched the clip later on his phone. His eyes filled with tears. "They really said that?" he asked his mom. She nodded, brushing his hair gently. "They meant every word, baby." For the first time in days, Dion smiled a little. "Then maybe something good will come out of this," he whispered. Across town, the officer sat alone in his house, facing the growing storm. Every channel showed his face. Every headline questioned his actions. The department had opened an internal investigation, and community groups were demanding that he be charged. He turned off the TV, but the noise didn't stop. Outside his window, people shouted for justice. Days turned into weeks. Dion's condition slowly improved. He started sitting up, eating small meals, and even talking more. The Rock and Cena kept visiting whenever they could, bringing him new things to keep his spirits up. A basketball hoop for his room, a stack of motivational books, and sometimes just quiet company. Dion's mother often told them, "I don't know how to thank you enough." The Rock would shake his head and say, "You don't have to. Just focus on him." One afternoon, a small press conference was held at the hospital. Dion, sitting in a wheelchair, spoke for the first time in public. His voice was still soft but clear. "I don't hate anyone," he said. "I just want people to understand that I didn't do anything wrong. I want kids like me to feel safe walking home." The room went silent. Reporters lowered their cameras. The Rock stood behind him, quietly proud. Cena placed a supportive hand on the boy's shoulder. That moment went viral too, not because it was dramatic, but because it was pure. It showed a young man choosing forgiveness over hate, hope over anger. And as Dion continued to heal, the world around him started to change. People were talking, not just about one event, but about how things could be better. Local leaders began setting up meetings, youth programs, and community events. The Rock and Cena promised they'd help however they could. What had started as a heartbreaking moment was slowly turning into something else, a movement for understanding, fairness, and unity. But even as things began to move forward, everyone knew this was only the beginning. There were questions that still needed answers, and a justice system that still had to speak. And deep down, Dion knew his life would never be the same again. But maybe, just maybe, his story could change more than just his own future. The days that followed felt heavier than usual for everyone in town. The streets were quieter, the conversations slower. It was as if the whole community was still trying to process what had happened. Every TV channel, every social media feed, every conversation at the diner or grocery store circled back to the same story. The teenager who got shot, and the two famous men who stepped in to help him. Dion was still in the hospital, recovering little by little. Each day he could move a bit more, speak a bit longer, and smile a bit easier. But his mind replayed that day over and over. The flashing lights, the shouting, the fear, and that moment he fell. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night, his heart racing, remembering the sound of chaos around him. His mother would come running, sit beside him, and whisper softly, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." The Rock and John Cena continued visiting him every few days. They didn't come with cameras or press there. They came like family. They'd bring snacks, talk about movies or sports, and sometimes just sit quietly watching TV together. The Rock would often remind him, "You didn't ask for this, but now you've got a voice. Use it for something good." One morning, Dion was sitting by the window watching the sunrise through the hospital glass. His mother walked in with breakfast, and behind her came the Rock, carrying a gym bag. "I figured you'd be tired of hospital food," he said with a grin, handing him a sandwich. "Extra bacon, just like you like it." Dion laughed. "You remembered?" "Of course," the Rock said, pulling up a chair. "You think I forget a man's favorite food?" "Never." They ate together quietly for a bit. Then Dion asked something that had been on his mind for days. "Do you think people are going to forget? You know, after all this noise dies down?" The Rock looked at him seriously. "People forget headlines, but they don't forget stories that touch them. You're not just a headline. You're someone people care about now. You're a reminder that we've got to do better." Dion nodded slowly, thinking about those words. Across town, protests were growing. People marched with signs that said things like "Justice for Dion" and "We deserve better." But Dion's mother didn't go. She wanted peace, not anger. She told people, "We just want the truth. We just want change." Meanwhile, the officer, Rickson, was under investigation. The department had released a statement saying they were reviewing all the footage and witness accounts. But that didn't calm people down. Everyone had seen the videos. It was clear what had happened. The Rock and Cena were asked to testify as witnesses, and both agreed without hesitation. One afternoon, a reporter managed to get permission to interview The Rock outside the hospital. He asked him, "Why are you still here?" "You've done your part." The Rock smiled faintly. "When you see something wrong, you don't just walk away. It's not about being famous. It's about being human. That kid didn't deserve what happened to him. None of us can change the past, but we can make sure it means something." The clip went viral again, spreading hope and unity. Many people began to organize community gatherings instead of angry protests. They wanted action, not destruction. In the hospital, Dion started physical therapy. The sessions were tough. Every movement brought pain. But he didn't complain. The therapist told him he'd need months before he could run again, maybe longer before he could play basketball like before. Dion just nodded, determined. One afternoon, Cena came to see him during a session. "Man, you're tougher than I thought," he said, watching him take careful steps with a walker. Dion grinned through the effort. "You think I'm letting this stop me?" "No chance," Cena laughed. "That's the spirit. You've got the heart of a fighter." That night, when the hospital was quiet, Dion sat awake. He thought about the kids from his school who had sent him letters and drawings. Some said he was their hero. Some said they were scared too, but seeing him survive made them feel braver. Reading those letters filled him with a strange mix of pride and sadness. The next morning, The Rock walked in with some big news. "You've got visitors," he said, smiling. Dion looked surprised as two kids from his basketball team entered the room, holding a banner they made that said, "We're with you." Coach, they weren't just his teammates anymore. They saw him as a leader. One of them said, "When you come back, we're naming our team after you." Dion laughed softly. "You better win some games first." The room filled with warmth. For a moment, it didn't feel like a hospital anymore. It felt like home. Outside, though, the tension in the town continued to grow. News vans lined the police station and interviews played non-stop. The investigation revealed that Rickson had a history of complaints against him, cases that were ignored or quietly closed. That made people even angrier. When The Rock heard about it, he shook his head. "This isn't just about one bad moment," he said to Cena. "It's about a system that lets bad choices repeat." Cena agreed. "We've got to do something more than just talk." They started reaching out to organizations that worked with young people and police officers. The idea was to bring both sides together, to create understanding instead of hate. They called it Project Respect. It was still just an idea, but people were already listening. Meanwhile, Dion's recovery kept improving. His mother stayed strong, though sometimes she'd cry quietly when she thought no one was watching. The Rock noticed one day and gently said, "You raised a strong boy. You should be proud." She smiled through her tears. "I am. I just wish he didn't have to go through this to prove it." Weeks later, the hospital finally released Dion. The day he walked out, cameras waited outside. But The Rock and Cena made sure it didn't feel like a circus. They surrounded him, protecting his space. People cheered from the sidewalks as he slowly stepped out into the sunlight for the first time in months. Reporters shouted questions, but Dion only said one thing: "I'm just happy to go home." At home, his neighbors welcomed him like a hero. The kids from the basketball team brought a signed jersey. Local businesses donated food and gifts. The Rock and Cena stayed for a while, helping his mom set up a small recovery space in the living room with exercise equipment and books. Over the next few days, Dion's story spread beyond Florida. Major news channels picked it up, and people across the country sent letters of support. A famous talk show invited him, but he declined. He didn't want fame. He wanted change. The Rock told him, "You don't need to chase attention. You already have people's respect. Now use it to build something that lasts." So they started planning something new together. A community event that would bring people together. It wouldn't be a protest or a rally. It would be about healing. They called it a day of unity. Local artists, teachers, police officers, and families were invited. The Rock and Cena offered to sponsor it. Dion wanted it held at the same basketball court where he used to play before everything happened. On the morning of the event, the sun shone bright the same way it had that day months ago. But this time, the mood was completely different. The court was decorated with colorful banners, music played softly, and kids laughed as they shot hoops. Dion arrived wearing his old team jersey, walking carefully but proudly. When he stepped onto the court, everyone cheered. The Rock gave him a hug and whispered, "You made it, champ." The mayor spoke, the police chief apologized publicly, and then Dion was asked to say a few words. He stood at the microphone looking at the sea of faces. People who once felt divided but now stood together. "I'm not here to talk about what happened," he said slowly. "I'm here to talk about what comes next. We can't change what's behind us, but we can decide what's ahead. If we stand together, no matter what we look like or where we come from, then something good can grow from something bad." The crowd went silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. The Rock smiled proudly, Cena clapped hard, and Dion's mother wiped away tears. That day became more than just an event. It became a new beginning for the town. Kids signed up for after-school programs. Police officers volunteered to mentor local teens. People who never spoke before started talking, laughing, and working together. And as the sun began to set, Dion sat on the court bench beside The Rock and Cena, looking around at the peaceful crowd. "This feels different," he said softly. "It is," The Rock replied, "because you made people feel again." Dion looked at the court, the place where everything started. "I just wanted to play basketball," he said with a small smile. Cena chuckled. "You ended up changing lives instead." The night grew quieter as the event wound down. Families walked home with smiles and kids waved goodbye to Dion. For the first time since that awful day, the town didn't feel broken anymore, it felt whole. And as Dion leaned back, looking at the stars above, he whispered to himself, maybe this was all meant to happen, so something good could come from it. The Rock glanced at him and smiled. "That's the kind of thinking that changes the world, kid." And deep down, Dion believed it. Because even though his scar would always remind him of that day, his story had already become something far bigger than pain. It had become hope. The next morning, the whole town woke up to chaos. The video from the scene had already gone viral overnight. Every social media platform was filled with clips showing the moment when the officer fired, the crowd screaming, and The Rock and John Cena running to help the teen. News stations played it on repeat, each one asking the same question. How did this happen? People who never knew the boy before were now talking about him everywhere. His name was on trending pages, in radio shows, and in morning headlines. Strangers online called him the brave kid, and many used his story to talk about fairness and justice. Some people cried watching the video. Others were angry, saying this was what they feared could happen to any innocent person. But amid the noise, two people were thinking of him more than anyone else: The Rock and John Cena. Both men couldn't forget that moment. They had come to the town for a small charity event, but what they saw that day kept playing in their minds like a movie that refused to stop. They remembered his face, his calm words, his fear, and the way the crowd froze in shock. They also remembered how unfair it all felt. The Rock, who had seen and heard many tough things in life, told reporters later, "No one should go through that. Not when they're doing nothing wrong." The teen, named Dion, was still in the hospital. The bullet had missed his vital organs, and doctors said he would recover, though it would take time. The first few days were hard. He barely spoke. His mother stayed by his side, holding his hand, whispering prayers. When The Rock and John Cena visited, the room suddenly felt warmer. Dion opened his eyes slowly, a weak smile forming. The Rock gently said, "You're stronger than you know, kid." Cena added, "The world's watching you, but not for the wrong reason this time. They're watching because they believe in you." Those words brought tears to his mother's eyes. She thanked them both over and over, but they told her they just did what any person should have done. Still, they promised they wouldn't let the story fade away. "We'll make sure the truth comes out," Cena said quietly before leaving. Over the next few weeks, the case grew bigger. Reporters camped outside the police department. The mayor held an emergency meeting. People protested in the streets, holding signs that said, "Justice for Dion," and "No more silence." But the protests stayed peaceful. That was something Dion's family had asked for. No anger, no violence. Just truth. The officer, Rickson, was suspended while the investigation began. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind his badge. The footage was clear. Witnesses spoke up. Some even shared stories of how he had treated them unfairly before. The department could no longer ignore the pattern. The Rock and Cena used their platforms to call for fair handling of the case. Not revenge, but accountability. They said, "We can't fix the past, but we can demand better for the future." Every interview they gave spread hope. People who had lost faith in the system began to believe change might be possible. The two stars didn't want fame from this. They wanted awareness. They met with Dion's lawyer, his family, and local leaders to discuss building something positive out of the tragedy. They didn't want this story to just be another sad headline. Meanwhile, Dion was recovering slowly. Each day he could move a little more, sit up a little longer. The hospital staff treated him like family. Some would quietly tell him, "You're changing the world, kid." At first, he didn't believe it. He just wanted to go home, play basketball, and see his friends again. But as more letters and drawings came from people all over the country, he started to realize he had become a voice for many who had felt unheard. One evening, as the sun set outside his window, Dion told his mother, "Maybe this happened for a reason. Maybe I'm supposed to do something with it." She smiled, brushing his hair back. "You already are," she said softly. By the time the trial started, everyone knew the story. Cameras filled the courtroom steps. Reporters tried to interview anyone connected to the case. The Rock and Cena both showed up quietly, sitting in the back, not as celebrities but as witnesses who had seen it with their own eyes. The judge ordered fairness and calm in the courtroom, reminding everyone that truth needed to speak louder than noise. When Dion took the stand, he didn't speak with anger. His voice was calm even though his hands trembled a little. He said, "I didn't want to fight anyone that day. I was just walking home. I raised my hands because I didn't want trouble. I was scared, but I still believed he would see I wasn't a threat." The whole courtroom was silent. Even the officer looked down, unable to meet his eyes. After weeks of hearings and evidence, the court found that the officer had used unnecessary force and violated department policy. He was removed from duty permanently and faced further charges. But Dion didn't celebrate. He simply said, "I forgive him. I just don't want this to happen again to anyone else." That single line was repeated on every news channel. It reminded people that forgiveness didn't mean weakness. It meant strength. Dion became a symbol of calm in the middle of chaos, a reminder that change can come from courage, not hate. In the months that followed, something beautiful started to happen in the community. People who had once been afraid to speak began to meet, talk, and share their experiences. Police officers joined neighborhood discussions. Churches opened their doors for dialogue sessions. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A small step toward healing. The Rock and John Cena returned to the town one last time that year. They didn't come for cameras or events. They came quietly to visit Dion and his family. Together, they walked through a construction site where workers were building a new youth center, a place where kids could play, study, and learn about leadership. The project was funded by donations from people inspired by Dion's story, including both celebrities. The sign at the entrance read, "The Dion Project for Unity, Strength, and Hope." Seeing his name there made Dion's eyes fill with tears. "I don't deserve all this," he said softly. The Rock smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You do, because you turned pain into purpose. That's something not many can do." The youth center became a beacon in the town. Every week, young people gathered there to play basketball, read, or simply talk. Dion helped lead a program about fairness and self-respect. He never lectured anyone. He just shared his story, reminding them that one mistake or one moment shouldn't define a person's life. His quiet strength inspired many. The Rock and Cena occasionally sent support messages or surprise visits to encourage the kids. They never made it about fame. It was about continuing the promise they made, to make sure something good came out of what happened. And they kept that promise. News reporters sometimes tried to revisit the old story, asking Dion about the day of the shooting. But he always shifted the focus. "I don't want to talk about that moment anymore," he would say. "I want to talk about what we're building now." And that's what people loved about him. He moved forward, not backward. Even the police department went through changes. New training programs were started, focused on communication and bias awareness. Officers who once ignored complaints began listening more. Some even volunteered at the youth center to rebuild trust. The town wasn't perfect, and no place ever is, but it was no longer divided by fear. By the end of that year, Dion's story had touched millions. He appeared on talk shows not as a victim, but as a survivor and leader. His calm way of speaking and his belief in kindness moved people across the world. One interviewer asked him, "Do you still believe in justice?" He paused, thought for a moment, and said, "Yes, because I've seen it work when people choose love over anger." The Rock and John Cena continued to support his mission, donating to other communities facing similar challenges. They often said, "Dion reminded us what real strength looks like, not in a ring or on a screen, but in life." And so what began as a tragedy became a story of healing and change. It wasn't just about a moment caught on camera. It was about what people did afterward, how they stood together, spoke up, and built something better. Dion proved that even when the world seems unfair, goodness can still rise from it if someone dares to forgive and move forward. As the year came to an end, Dion looked out from the youth center balcony one evening, watching the sunset. The sky glowed in shades of orange and gold. Kids were playing basketball below, laughing freely. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace. He whispered to himself, "This is what it should have been all along." And somewhere deep inside, he knew that day, the day that nearly broke him, had instead become the day that made him stronger. The town had slowly started to feel different. Streets were quieter, not because people were afraid, but because something had changed inside them. People spoke more gently, greeted neighbors they had ignored before, and smiled at kids who played freely in the parks. Dion could feel it too. Life had returned to normal in some ways, but he knew things would never be exactly the same. That wasn't a bad thing. Months had passed since the day he was shot. His body had healed, though the memory remained. Every morning he walked a little further, practiced basketball a little longer, and learned to trust himself and others again. He had started helping at the youth center more often, showing kids how to play basketball, teaching teamwork, and sharing lessons he had learned in a way that wasn't scary or strict. He never made it about the day he was shot. Instead, he talked about courage, kindness, and standing up for what's right. The Dion Project, as the youth center was now called, became a symbol for the town. It was more than just a place to play. It was a place to learn about respect, fairness, and hope. Kids from different neighborhoods came together there, some who had never talked before now laughing and playing side by side. Local teachers and volunteers ran reading clubs, homework help sessions, and leadership workshops. Police officers joined as mentors, building bridges with the community. The town slowly learned that when people worked together, Even small actions could create big change. The Rock and John Cena continued to support the project. They visited when they could, bringing supplies, inspiring the kids with stories of determination, and helping to keep the energy positive. They were careful not to make the center about themselves. Instead, they focused on the message that young people deserved safety, encouragement, and a chance to shine.